The sound of a newborn baby crying is the most beautiful sound in the world. It is the sound of hope, the sound of love being born, the sound of a miracle breathing its first breath. But sometimes, in the middle of the greatest joy of your life, the universe whispers something that stops your heart cold. This is one of those stories. The delivery room at St. Mercy Hospital was filled with the kind of energy that only exists in two places on earth: inside a church during prayer, and inside a hospital when a life is about to begin. Margaret Collins lay on the hospital bed, exhausted and trembling, her dark hair soaked with sweat, her knuckles white from squeezing the metal railing beside her. She had been in labor for 11 hours. 11 long, painful, terrifying hours. Beside her, holding her hand so tightly that his own fingers had gone numb, was her husband, Daniel Collins. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with kind brown eyes that were now red from crying, not from sadness, from joy. Pure, overwhelming, earth-shaking joy. Because today, after 6 years of trying, after 3 rounds of IVF treatment, after more heartbreak than any two people should ever have to carry, today was the day. Today, Margaret and Daniel were finally becoming parents. Not to one baby, to 2 twins. The room erupted. "She's here," the nurse called out, her voice cracking with emotion as she held up the first baby, a tiny, pink, perfect little girl, screaming her lungs out at the unfairness of being born into such a cold, bright world. Daniel pressed both hands over his mouth. His entire body shook. "And him," said Dr. Ellison quietly, cradling the second baby, a boy, smaller than his sister but just as loud, just as furious, just as alive. Margaret was sobbing before she even saw their faces. "Are they okay?" she kept asking, her voice breaking on every word. "Are they okay? Are they healthy?" "They're beautiful," the nurse said, placing the little girl against Margaret's chest. Daniel leaned down, his forehead touching Margaret's, both of them looking at this tiny face, this impossible miracle. And for a moment, just one perfect, golden moment, everything in the world was exactly right. Daniel kissed Margaret's forehead. "We did it," he whispered. 6 years, Maggie. We finally did it." She laughed and cried at the same time. "They're real," she whispered back. "They're actually real." Dr. Nathan Ellison stood at the side of the room, gloves still on, watching the family with the quiet smile of a man who had delivered hundreds of babies, but never quite gotten used to this part. The part where broken people became whole again. He instructed the nurses to begin the standard post-delivery checks: weight, length, APGAR scores, blood type. He stepped out briefly to review the paperwork, and when he came back, his expression had changed. Just slightly, just enough. He stood at the counter for a long time, looking at the 2 charts in his hands. His jaw was tight. He read the numbers again, then a third time, as if hoping they would rearrange themselves into something that made sense. They didn't. He called for the senior nurse quietly. She came. He showed her the chart. She looked at him. He looked at her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then she said softly, "Doctor, are you sure?" He nodded once. She pressed her lips together and left the room. Dr. Ellison walked slowly back toward the Collins family. Daniel was holding his son now, rocking him gently, laughing at something the baby was doing with his tiny fist. Margaret was watching them both with the most peaceful, radiant expression, the expression of a woman who had finally exhaled after holding her breath for 6 years. Dr. Ellison stood at the foot of the bed. "Daniel," he said. "Margaret." Something in his voice made them both look up immediately. Daniel noticed first the doctor's face, the careful, measured stillness of it, the way he was holding the clipboard just a little too tightly. "What is it?" Daniel asked. His voice was still warm, still riding the wave of joy. He hadn't landed yet. He didn't know he was about to. Dr. Ellison pulled a chair to the bedside and sat down. That small gesture, sitting down, lowering himself to their level, said more than any words could. Daniel's smile slowly faded. "Is something wrong with one of them?" Margaret asked quickly, sitting up straighter. "Is it the boy? Is he—" "Both babies are healthy," Dr. Ellison said immediately. "I want you to hear that clearly. Both of your children are perfectly healthy. Then what? During the routine post-delivery blood work, the doctor said slowly, carefully, like a man diffusing something, we identified something unusual, something I need to discuss with you both before we go any further. The room was very quiet now. The baby in Daniel's arms had fallen asleep. The twins, Dr. Ellison said, appear to have different blood types. Different enough that it raised a flag in the system. We ran a secondary check. He paused. Based on the initial blood work profile, and I want to stress that full genetic confirmation will take several days. The preliminary results suggest that the two babies may not share the same biological father. Silence. Complete, absolute, crushing silence. Margaret's face went white. Daniel did not move. He did not blink. He did not breathe. He simply stood there, holding his sleeping son, staring at the doctor, and something behind his eyes went very, very still, the way a lake goes still right before a storm hits. What did you just say? Daniel asked. His voice was almost a whisper. I know how this sounds, Dr. Ellison said, and I want to be very clear. We are not drawing any conclusions yet. Medicine is complex. There are rare cases, a phenomenon called heteropaternal superfecundation, where... What are you saying? Daniel's voice cracked. Are you saying that my wife... Daniel. Margaret's voice was sharp and broken at the same time. Daniel, look at me. He turned to look at her, and something in the way she was looking at him, the raw, terrified, desperate honesty in her eyes, made his chest fracture. I have not been with anyone else, she said. Her voice was shaking, but every word was solid. You know that. You know me. Then how... He stopped. His voice broke completely. He stepped back, clutching the baby tighter, and turned toward the window. No one in the room spoke. Before the story continues, if emotional stories like this one move you, if they make you feel something real, please take a moment right now to subscribe to Soul of Kindness. Your support means everything to this channel and helps stories like this one reach more hearts. Subscribe and let's keep kindness alive together. The next 48 hours were the longest of Margaret and Daniel's lives. They barely spoke. They sat on opposite sides of the hospital room, each of them holding a baby when feeding time came. Each of them loving their children completely and without question, but with a wall of unbearable silence rising between them. Daniel didn't accuse her. He didn't yell. He didn't demand anything. In some ways, that silence was worse than anger would have been. Margaret watched him from across the room and felt something she had never felt in 12 years of marriage. She felt him slipping away, and she had no way to hold on because she didn't understand what was happening any more than he did. On the third day, Dr. Ellison called them both into his office. He closed the door. He sat down. He folded his hands on the desk and looked at them both for a long moment before he spoke. The full genetic results came back this morning. Neither of them breathed, and I owe you both an apology, he said, not just as your doctor, but as the physician who represents this hospital. Margaret's brow furrowed. What do you mean? Dr. Ellison opened a folder. Inside were pages of clinical documentation, correspondence, laboratory records. When you underwent your third IVF cycle at this hospital 2 years ago, he began, there was a procedural error in our fertility lab. The air in the room shifted. During the embryo preparation process, a mislabeling incident occurred between 2 separate patient samples. 2 embryos were created, one using Daniel's genetic material, and one using a donor sample that had been incorrectly stored in the same batch. Both embryos were transferred during your procedure. We believed, incorrectly, that both were from the same source. Margaret pressed her hand over her mouth. The hospital became aware of this lab error 8 months ago. Dr. Ellison continued, his voice tight with controlled gravity. An internal audit flagged it, but because the error occurred over 18 months prior, and because we had no way of knowing which patients were affected without their knowledge or consent, the decision was made to wait and evaluate on a case-by-case basis at delivery. Daniel leaned forward very slowly. You knew, he said. You already knew there was a possibility of this. Dr. Ellison did not look away. Yes, and you didn't tell us. The decision was made above my level. I disagreed with it then. I disagree with it now. And I am telling you today, both of you, because you deserve the truth, and because I refuse to be part of hiding it from you any longer." The room was silent for a long time. Then Margaret began to cry, not quietly, not gracefully. She cried the way a person cries when something they were afraid was their fault turns out not to be their fault at all, with a grief that is also relief, with a sorrow that is also the release of an unbearable weight. Daniel sat very still, and then, slowly, something in his face changed. He had spent 3 days building a wall, 3 days putting bricks of doubt and pain between himself and the woman he loved, 3 days looking at her and almost believing the worst. And in that moment, sitting in that office, hearing the truth, he felt every single one of those bricks come loose. He stood up. He crossed the room. He sat beside his wife and pulled her into his arms, and she grabbed onto him like someone grabbing onto a rope at the edge of a cliff. "I'm sorry," he said into her hair. "Maggie, I'm so sorry." "You didn't know," she whispered. "I should have trusted you. I should have—" "You didn't know," she said again, and she held him tighter. The months that followed were not simple. The hospital launched a full investigation. Legal proceedings began. The Collins family was assigned a patient advocate and offered a formal settlement. There were long conversations with lawyers, with counselors, with each other. And there were 2 babies. A girl they named Clara, a boy they named Noah. Clara and Noah, who shared a crib and reached for each other in the dark, who slept better when they were side by side, who, from the very first week of their lives, seemed to understand something that the adults around them were still learning. That blood is not the whole of belonging. That family is not only genetics. That love, real love, chosen love, is something you build with your hands and your heart every single day, not something printed in a lab report. Daniel held Noah one evening, the baby's tiny hand wrapped around his finger, and he felt it. The same thing he'd felt with Clara. The same fierce, irrational, unconditional love. Not because of DNA, not because of biology, because this was his son, because he had chosen to be his father. And that choice, made quietly in a hospital room, in the aftermath of a storm, was the most powerful thing Daniel Collins had ever done. Margaret watched them from the doorway, and she thought about all the years they had tried, all the heartbreak, all the needles and procedures and waiting rooms and negative tests and shattered hope. She thought about how they had almost given up. She thought about the night Daniel held her in their kitchen and said, "One more time, we try one more time." She thought about how love is not a feeling that arrives and stays. It is a practice, a daily act of courage. She walked across the room and sat beside her husband. He leaned his head against hers. The babies slept between them, breathing softly, unaware of everything that had almost broken apart to bring them here. "We're going to be okay," Margaret said. Daniel nodded slowly. "We already are," he said. There is a kind of strength that the world rarely talks about. Not the strength of fighting back, not the strength of never breaking, but the strength of choosing to stay, choosing to trust, choosing to love, even when everything feels uncertain, even when the ground beneath you has shifted and you cannot yet see where it has settled. Margaret and Daniel Collins did not have a perfect story. They had a true one. And sometimes the truest stories are the ones that test every single thing you believe about yourself and show you that you are stronger and kinder and more capable of love than you ever knew. The twins were their miracle, both of them, always. And no lab result in the world could ever change that. If this story touched your heart, if it made you feel the weight of love and the power of truth, write Kindness Lives in the comments below. Share your thoughts. Tell us what this story meant to you. And if you know someone who needs to hear a story like this today, please share it with them, because kindness, like love, grows every time you pass it on. Thank you for watching Soul of Kindness.